The Krellian High Command had made a critical miscalculation. They had studied humanity for exactly 3 solar cycles, enough time, they believed, to understand these strange bipeds, who called themselves the dominant species of Earth. They had observed the humans' primitive weapons, their slow reproductive cycles, their soft bodies lacking natural armor or venomous glands. The Krellians had concluded that humans were weak. They had never observed human dinner time. Lyra Vale sat at the long plasteel table in Outpost Kepler 7's mess hall, a fork in one hand and a datapad in the other. Around her, 24 human colonists were engaged in the sacred ritual that had survived 10,000 years of evolution and 300 years of space travel. Complaining about the food while eating every last bite. "This protein paste tastes like recycled boot leather," muttered Jenkins from engineering. "That's because it probably is," Lyra replied without looking up from her geological survey reports. She scooped another spoonful into her mouth. The paste was gray, lukewarm, and had the texture of industrial sealant. She barely noticed. The warning klaxons should have interrupted dinner. They didn't. When the first explosion rocked the outpost's eastern perimeter, Lyra glanced at the emergency lights, now strobing red across the ceiling, then back at her plate. She had 4 more spoonfuls of protein paste and half a cup of coffee left. The geological survey was due tomorrow. Priorities. "Perimeter breach," announced Martinez from security, his voice crackling through the intercom. "Multiple hostiles. Krellian death squad. Estimated 40 combatants. They're coming in fast." Lyra sighed and took another bite. Around her, the other colonists continued eating. Thompson reached for the salt. Williams asked someone to pass the synthetic butter. The Krellians burst through the mess hall doors 3 minutes later. They were impressive specimens 2 meters tall, covered in chitinous armor that had evolved over millions of years to withstand projectile weapons and energy beams. Their 4 arms each held a plasma rifle. Their mandibles clicked with anticipation. They had killed 17 species across 9 star systems. Humanity would be the 18th. The lead warrior, Ricard, had been chosen specifically for this mission. He was young by Krellian standards, barely into his 3rd molt, but he had distinguished himself in the massacre of the Quellan colonies. He stepped into the mess hall with his rifles raised, ready to paint the walls with human viscera. The humans looked up from their dinner. "We're eating," Lyra said. Ricard's translator struggled with the statement. Surely she meant to say they were surrendering or begging for mercy. The translator ran the phrase through its database 3 times before confirming. She had said they were eating. "You will die," Ricard announced, his voice modulated to inspire terror. His death squad fanned out behind him, 40 of the Krellian Empire's finest warriors. "Your pathetic outpost will burn. Your species will—" Yeah, interrupted Jenkins. "Kill. Maim. Conquer. We've heard it before. There's protein paste in the dispenser if you want some. Fair warning. It's terrible." The Krellians opened fire. It was, by all objective measures, an overwhelming assault. Plasma bolts filled the air. The temperature in the mess hall spiked by 40 degrees. 3 tables were instantly vaporized. The humans moved. Lyra was already rolling behind an overturned bench before the first shot finished firing, her fork still in her hand. She had been interrupted during 14 different meals during her 20-year career as a colonial surveyor, twice by pirates, once by a solar flare, 3 times by reactor malfunctions, 7 times by indigenous wildlife, once by an extremely poorly timed marriage proposal. She was done being polite about it. Williams, who had been reaching for the butter, grabbed his plate instead and hurled it like a discus. The ceramic disc caught a Krellian warrior in the optical cluster, shattering 3 of his compound eyes. Before the warrior could scream, Williams had closed the distance and was beating him with a chair. Thompson had been finishing his coffee. He still was one hand holding his mug, the other hand holding a Krellian warrior by the throat, slamming him repeatedly into the wall while he took careful sips. Lyra watched Ricard line up a shot at Martinez. She threw her fork. The utensil wasn't aerodynamic. It wasn't balanced for throwing. It was a cheap piece of stamped metal designed to push food into mouths. It tumbled through the air like a drunk bird. It buried itself 3 centimeters into Rickar's left eye. The young warrior screamed a sound like ripping metal and stumbled backward. His rifles clattered to the floor. He clawed at his face with all 4 hands, ichor streaming between his fingers. Lyra stood up, walked over, and picked up her fork. She wiped it on Rickar's armor. "That's mine," she said. Around them, the battle was already over. The Krellian death squad, 40 of the Empire's most elite warriors, lay scattered across the mess hall. Some were unconscious. Some were dead. Most were somewhere in between. Jenkins was using one as a footstool while he finished his protein paste. Williams had gone back for seconds. Rickar stared up at Lyra through his remaining eyes, his mandibles clicking weakly. The translator in his armor sputtered to life. "How?" he managed. "How did you? We are warriors, trained since hatching. You were just eating." Lyra looked down at the fork in her hand, then back at Rickar. She thought about trying to explain. About the fact that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as persistence hunters who refused to stop. About how they had clawed their way to the top of Earth's food chain not through strength or armor, but through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. About how you don't interrupt a human's meal and expect to walk away. Instead, she said, "Yeah. We were eating. Past tense. Thanks to you. My protein paste got cold." She drove the fork down. Martinez's voice crackled over the intercom. Cleanup crew to the mess hall. Bring the big mops. And maybe a psychologist. Jenkins is building a fort out of alien corpses." Lyra returned to her seat. Her plate was exactly where she'd left it, protected by an overturned table. The protein paste was, as predicted, cold. She ate it anyway. It still tasted like boot leather. She barely noticed. By the time the Krellian Empire's fleet arrived to investigate why their death squad had stopped transmitting, they found the outpost's humans sitting down to breakfast. The rescue team found Rickar and his warriors stacked neatly outside the airlock with a handwritten note attached. "Please do not disturb during meals. Next time will be worse." The Krellian High Command studied the note for exactly 17 seconds before declaring humanity a protected species and redrawing their territorial maps. Some lessons, they had learned, were best learned quickly, especially the ones about dinner time.